Your frequency is contagious. You put one negative person in a room of 1,000 people, and you will drop the vibrational frequency of that room. However, you can bring one positive person into a room of 1,000, and they carry the potential, doesn't always happen, but they carry the potential to completely elevate the entire room and shift them back into a different state. Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast, a space dedicated to one belief that you have the power within to create everything you seek. So if you are ready to step into a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with me. I'm your host, Rudi Riekstins, and this is the InPowered Life. Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast. You're joined with Rudi and Anniston Riekstins, and today we're going to be talking about frequency, more specifically, your frequency, and how can you identify what it is that you are feeling, where is it coming from, and why should you be paying attention to this information? We already know that we live in a universe that is comprised of nothing but energy, and it is a collective of energy, and how fast or how slow and how many of these vibrational energetic, atoms or frequencies are in any given space determines what it is, but it also determines what you're going to experience next. And so we have a juicy episode for you today that really does carry the potential to change everything for you. And right now, Anniston and I were preparing for an incredible, jam-packed Friday. We had all these things planned. We were going to do podcast recordings. We were going to, go through some content that we were creating for future projects. And it was just all like do stuff for this Friday. And we stopped. And we went for an hour-long walk after we'd already done a workout earlier in the day because the Schumann resonance was so high at the time that we felt completely dysregulated. And Anniston and I turned to each other and we said, we need to shift this right now. And that's what we want to bring your awareness to today, that when you are feeling a certain way, you're actually empowered to do something about it.
This is really, I think, a whole new level of being human. I feel like the curriculum that we have been given has gotten us to where we are today, but moving forward is going to require a new curriculum, new life skills. And it requires becoming a good steward of your energy. And in order to be a good steward of your energy, you have to understand the dynamics of energy. You have to start to understand the dynamics of your energetic field and to be able to use your superpower of feeling and sensing into when you are in a low level energy pattern or when you are in a high level. And there's a very big difference in your reality depending on where you fall on that scale. And that's what Rudi and I discovered and really started educating ourselves more in depth as it related to energy and studying the works of many, many masters who have come before us, who are just pioneers in this field, so that we could better understand ourselves. And then as individuals, not only better manage our energy, but also ensure that what we're bringing into our household, what we're bringing to our relationship together, as well as our relationship with our children, is of the highest energy possible. Because quite frankly, I don't like to live in a low level energy pattern because of how it feels. And so today we just really wanted to give you a lens into how we view it and what has really supported us in mastering this.
So, where my inspiration came from for today's episode came through two different mediums, let me say. One was I was on social media and I saw an influencer that I follow. I happen to respect them very much. And they were speaking into the power of energy, except they said, you cannot create energy, you cannot control or curate energy, but that you could be in a high vibration energy, like be high vibe, or you can be low vibe. But they didn't speak into how you can shift your frequency. And that is a conscious choice. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, as much as I respect them, the way that that was articulated, and maybe that wasn't their intention, made it sound like we were at the mercy of what was happening. And that is the way that it is. And I then had the thought, I need to record this and I need to do an episode on it. And then the next morning, Aniston was standing in the kitchen with our two kids. They were sitting at the kitchen island eating their breakfast. And she sensed that the mood of one of our kids was really low. And maybe it was thinking about a test that was coming up. Maybe he didn't get a good night's sleep, but it was definitely something. Then you could tell he was kind of walking around a little mopey, which is very unusual for my son's rambunctious energy field. And so instead of saying, "Hey Brady, what's wrong? What's causing, this? Like, how did you sleep?" She didn't focus on what the problem was or what we were seeing as the incongruence from who he normally is. She turned to him and she said, "Brady, do you know what I love about you right now?" And she started speaking into all of his gifts, his talents, and the ways that he lately has been improving on things that he hadn't been doing really well. And I'm going to give you context. So, he would run off and go and play with his friends. We live in a neighborhood where we have kids everywhere. So they can run from house to house. And we would literally lose our son because we'd be like, which house is he in? And we'd have to call all the parents to find him. And so we'd say, "Brady, you have to tell us. You have to tell us where you're going, who you're seeing." And he's been phenomenal at that. And so she said in that moment, "Gosh, you know where you've really excelled? And I just want to acknowledge you. I want to honor you. You always tell us where you're going. There's been so much shifting and so much improvement." And then you could see he kind of started to perk up a little bit because who doesn't want to hear how awesome they are? And then she ended it with, "Rudy, what have you seen that, Brady's doing so well?" And then I added to it and ended by saying, "Are you, Brady, proud of you?" And he paused, finished chewing, and then he looked again, like contemplatively. And then he said, "I am. I'm actually very proud of me." And then we did the same exercise with our daughter. And when he jumped off the bar stool, he kind of had a pep in his step and he was singing again and he grabbed his backpack and the swagger was all in full flow. And that's such a beautiful example of understanding that energy that is who we are, it is innately what we are, has a frequency resonance and we can alter and or manipulate that. We can do it manually or we can have it adjusted for us. And so today what we really want to do is dive into asking you, how have you been feeling? And we ask that question a lot because the better questions, the better information, the better you're going to be aware of what's going around or happening that you can then create a shift. And so we thought that the best place for us to start would be through just giving you examples. I'm going to share with you right now. David Hawkins wrote an incredible book. I've got it next to me now, Power versus Force. And if you haven't read this book, we highly recommend you get it because it is going to really explain to you how much power you have as an individual. But more specifically, today, we're focusing in on the map consciousness, which is something that he speaks into and actually created a scale of emotion that we can track from a frequency perspective. And what we're going to do is give you just some of the highlights from this chart of emotion and what the frequency resonance is of these emotions, and then tell you kind of stories of either ourselves, our life, or people that we know that have been in certain states for certain periods of time, and what's the cost of staying there. Now, the point of today's exercise is so that you have an awareness to the way you feel has a resonance. That resonance is creating your future potential, but it's also either in that moment being creative, meaning it is supporting you in growing, and there's only 7 emotions that are in the upper creative category, which means they're strong positive emotions, or they're going to be weak emotions, going weaker to weakest, and those are going to be destructive emotions. And this is so important because you can be in a emotional state and you can get yourself out of it. Because if you're in a destructive emotional pattern, it's causing havoc. So, Aniston, I want you to start thinking of stories as I go through this.
Can I just say one thing
Yeah.
before you dive into the story? So, for those of you that aren't familiar with Dr. David Hawkins' work, he's brilliant. And we discovered his work, I don't know, over a decade ago. And it really has influenced so much of Rudy and I's work because we constantly come back to it in our own lives. And essentially, the point he's trying to make in the book from a very scientific perspective is that we are inherently way more powerful. Ooh, I'm all chill bumpy. When we are at the top of the scale of human emotions, if you will. He calls it the map of consciousness. And those emotions that are up on the height of the scale is like peace, love, joy. And unfortunately, in our culture, oftentimes we have equated anger with power. We have equated being really aggressive or, having this negative, like, fuel, if you will, that propels people forward and into action in order to make a change. But he wrote this book to demonstrate the simple, singular, powerful point that actually, in order to create any form of change in our external environment and not more chaos, we actually have to approach the problem with a different energy than it was created. So, if all problems are created out of fear and anger and guilt and shame and that country did this to us, so we're going to go to war and we're going to do all of these things, it cannot create anything but more of that fear, anger. And we see that, right? It never actually solves a problem. It just serves to give more people reason to retaliate. And then you never find that peace. And Mahatma Gandhi demonstrated the opposite. He approached a war-torn country and conflict with peace, and what happened was miraculous. What happened was a resolution that created peace and unity and love in a situation that otherwise would have escalated and turned, so he used that as the example. And that was really the premise for a lot of his work. And so I just wanted to lay that out because this has far reaching effects for us where we stand today in this time period at the greatest human awakening and simultaneously possibly one of the greatest times in our lifetime that we are going to experience a lot of contrast externally, heightened emotion. A lot of people got kind of revolutionary type energy, and you get to decide how you approach it, but you need to understand the physics of energy, right? And are you adding to the problem or are you solving the problem? So now let's go to the stories.
So I want to first layer the different emotions, and then we're going to feed them through specific stories. And when I read through some of the emotions, I want you to start to think for yourself as you hear me and assign either a 1 out of the megahertz scale, so 1 megahertz, all the way up to 700 megahertz, which is how he has created the scale of emotion. And so I want you to think about what is the highest vibrational frequency that you could think of. And every time I'm in a room and I ask this question, everyone says love. I want you to think about, what do you think is the lowest vibrational frequency on the planet? And people always say, oh, it's got to be anger. Like, yeah, when you're angry, that's the lowest vibrational frequency. And what we want to do today is really open up to you and show you how so many people are living chronically, habitually, and they're not in those heightened motions of necessarily, say, love or in anger, but they're living in maybe grief, or they're living in resentment, or they're living in shame. The lowest vibrational frequency on the planet, registering at only 20 megahertz, is shame. Love on the scale is only at 500. There's still 4 more emotions that are above love. And so we are striving to be in a state of love. Now, love is 500 megahertz, joy, 540, peace, which is why Gandhi was able to create such a revolution, because his focus was at a 600 megahertz scale. Enlightenment in David Hawkins' scale is at 700 to 1000 megahertz. We're all seeking, at the end of the day, enlightenment. And what is not registered on the scale, because the emerging science today has actually proven through studies that when people are in a state of authenticity, it actually rates. Now, listen to this astonishing number. Authenticity rates on the scale at 40 times higher, 40 times higher than enlightenment, which is between 700 and 1,000. And so we're chasing authenticity through the guise of seeking love, when all we need to do is step into being at peace, in joy, and moving up the scale. But we need to have a benchmark. Anniston, I would love to start off at the very bottom. Shame and guilt being the 2 lowest vibrational frequencies on the planet. How can we best articulate identifying that you're in a state of guilt and shame, and then how to be able to navigate out of this so that you can start to move up the emotional scale? As we're teaching, these are manual adjustments that need to be made.
Yeah. So shame's a tricky one because shame oftentimes is something that we hide or repress. So if you're wondering, do I have any shame? Well, what do you hide? What is that thing that you don't maybe if you're about to say it and then you're like, "No, no, no, I couldn't say that." Or it's the thing that you don't wanna think about, the story you don't wanna share with your partner. I mean, shame can show up in so many ways. It can show up at, playing a basketball game and having shame for messing it up. It can show up as shame around body shame and how your body looks and what you make that mean and carrying that shame. Think about how many women and men live with this negative body consciousness that they every time they look in the mirror they feel shame, right? So essentially your field is adjusting to 20 megahertz, which is the lowest of the scale, which means physically you actually have a lot less power and you are then going to be basically magnetizing and playing in a reality that matches that low level emotion, meaning you'll be experiencing more shame. But one of the most common and something that Rudy and I talk a lot about because it was a big part of our story is sexual shame. And I think in this culture, at least in the Western culture, it is so prevalent because think about it. Even the way, and we can stop here and talk about this a little bit, Rudy, because I think this is going to probably hit a nerve with some people and maybe they'll resonate with some of this. For me, sex was like, it was never spoken about. So even just the fact of it just never being openly spoken about. You never heard anyone talk about self-pleasure. I mean, I certainly didn't have my mom talking to me about self-pleasure or masturbation or anything like that, right? My parents never shared with us anything about their sexual relationship or having those open conversations. I think I learned about body parts from an encyclopedia. We didn't even use the words to describe what those body parts were. And if we did, we would like blush. Talk about collective shame as it relates to sexuality. So then fast forward, you're in your marriage and that's coming up and you're bringing that into the bedroom with you and you're bringing that into your relationship. And because you don't think about it, you might not think it's there, but it is. Like if you have any kind of resistance, if you have any issues, I call it any energy around or heavy judgment around sexuality, whether it be yours, whether it be other people's, there's shame there.
You know what was coming up for me while you were speaking, Aniston, was a memory of me as a little boy. I must have been about 10 years old. And I grew up in a home with three boys, two brothers, and then my dad. And my mom was very open about sex. She spoke about sex, she spoke about nudity, she spoke about right and wrong. But those were very limited conversations that happened sporadically over the course of my life. But I have a very, very strong memory that came up in the beginning of our marriage, but a memory that came up from around 10 years old that my father, when my older brother came into his sexual age, if you will, he started making masturbation jokes. And it was always this thing of like, oh, I'm going to catch you, that's bad, that's dirty. And he would do it in a playful way, but it terrified me. And I would have that thought of like, oh my God, I never want to be caught doing that. And I remember in my mind thinking like, who would ever want that? Who would ever want to touch themselves? Why would anybody do that? And it became the stigma around it was something that was shameful. It was something that you would have to hide, and it was something that you would never have to talk about. And when Anis and I got married, I'll never forget one day, and this was a random conversation that won't have context today, but she asked me if I ever masturbate. And I was like mortified. Like, of course not. I mean, like in absolute denial. I would never do such a thing. And she had that look on her face of like, oh my God, like you can be honest. And I remember that was the beginning of opening up. And had you asked me prior to that initial question, do you carry shame? I would have said, no, absolutely not. but I carried tremendous shame around desiring someone. And desire, just for reference, I have this up on my screen, is at 125 megahertz, so significantly better than shame. But we're still talking about being in a destructive frequency resonance, which is creating more disruption. And that is right below anger. And so if you're living in desire, you're desiring someone, but now you feel shameful that you've desired somebody, you're moving back down into very destructive frequencies. And I lived and tethered in that for years because if anyone had asked me, of course I would deny it to the ends of the earth because that's how I was programmed as a young boy that, oh, that's something that is very, very bad. I also thought it was bad to want my wife. It was bad to say, oh, wow, I'm aroused by you, or I'm turned on by you, or I want you, or I need you, because that fell back into there's something wrong with me if I have those desires. But what's coming up for me right now is actually a memory of somebody that I started coaching in the very beginning of my coaching career, whose husband had lost his job and could not find work for over 2 years and applied and applied and applied and then eventually stopped applying. And when I was speaking with her, she was speaking about how much shame he had. He would not make eye contact with her. Their sex completely stopped. The level of intimacy and conversation was gone because all of a sudden he was this shell of himself because he was so ashamed that at his
Mhm.
age, he couldn't find work and he couldn't provide for his family. So this is showing up in so many places.
You know where else too is in the past. So, like, the things that we do in our past where maybe we failed, we messed up, we made a mistake, we were learning, but you're perceiving it as, "This is so shameful." You are so ashamed, and you feel like you have to hold that shame because you're not worthy of releasing it. But what you don't understand is the cost, right? And so I just wanted to bring that up as you were talking, I was thinking about that.
Well, I would love for you to give our audience a perspective of shifting from either shame or shifting from guilt or from grief, because we're talking about really heavy, dense energies.
Yes.
And I will say what really shifted my shame from a sexual perspective was just you not making a big deal out of it and you
Mhm.
normalizing it and being like, God, I hope you masturbate. Like that's the most normal thing on the planet. Like, why wouldn't you love on you? And it sounds so silly now, but when I heard it then, it was the most foreign conversation I thought I could have with another human being. And I would love for you to help support people who are in a emotional state, but that feels all consuming. And how would you coach or support them to navigate out of that to start accessing maybe not the highest frequencies, but moving through the scale?
100%. So I would say with shame, the big thing is shame loves to be hidden. Shame is going to want to hide in the crevices or in the inner room in your inner psyche that you don't ever go into. And you will literally rearrange your entire life so you don't have to, even unconsciously. And so the key is you've got to shine a light on it. And it can start with just you. It can start with just you in your own company with a pen and a piece of paper and you being willing to write it down. I feel shame about da 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 da, right? For Rudy and I think in coming back to the sexual conversation, really what set us free was two things. Number one was sharing with each other. So if you have a safe space created in your marriage where you feel like, I mean, even in a safe space with Rudy and I, which I would argue have one of the safest marriages that has ever existed, it was still not easy. There was still that fear of judgment. There was that fear of like, well, once I share this fantasy, I can't take it back, and that fear is real. But what we realized was it was costing us too much, and we wanted to know what it was like to be in our relationship without any of that shame. And let me tell you, it's all gotten better. Everything has got as up leveled in the most incredible ways since we have been willing to share authentically what it is that even that we were feeling shame about. And then in discussion, what happened was acceptance. And if you notice on the scale, right, it's very hard to accept within yourself what you're not even willing to say out loud. But if you can say it out loud to someone who is safe, then that will lead to acceptance, which is a much higher rated energy. Simultaneously, if we're talking about guilt, And I want to give an example, maybe a little less serious, but actually it's very common and it's very powerful. Let's use it as it relates to food. Because I think a lot of us have maybe in the past or currently, maybe there's some food that every time you eat it, you feel tremendously guilty about it. Or maybe it's drinking alcohol or something that you do regularly, but yet when you do it every time, you feel guilty. And that is so destructive. It would be better for you to say, you know what? I'm going to feel good about this. Like your body would be better because your body responds to the guilt. Thus, it processes it in that way. Thus, it is harmful for your body. And that's something that Rudy and I learned. We've learned many times, but I remember distinctly reading Anita Morjani's book, Dying to Be Me. And she uses a story in there after having this near death experience, which is really powerful. Highly recommend you read that book. But she explains how after that experience, she came back with a whole, like a much higher perspective. And that from that day on, she ate ice cream every day and she felt nothing but joy in doing so. And so the things that you do that you feel guilt over are very, very destructive. It would be better for you to accept, you know what? I'm gonna do this because it brings me joy. I'm gonna do this because this pizza, I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna love every single bite I take, and my body's gonna process it well. Totally different experience. And so I think sometimes guilt can come in areas that we think of guilt as, oh my gosh, I had an affair and I feel guilty. Oh my gosh, I yelled at my child and I feel guilty. But guilt can come in on every level of life.
You mentioned something that I want to touch on, and that was moving from guilt or shame into acceptance. And acceptance is at 350 megahertz, which is 100 megahertz above the baseline. And the
Mhm.
baseline is neutrality.
Neutrality.
And the reason I want to share this at 250 megahertz, when you are neutral on a topic, you're not adding positively or negatively, the actual emotion of being neutral. And what I love about this is it's easier to go from an area where you were shameful to being neutral than it is to go from being shameful to accepting it. And I love Abraham Hicks's teachings of talking about going up the emotional scale and saying you can't go from being angry to joy. You've got to make the next step. And so maybe you go from anger and now you've got to be in, despair. And then you go to, okay, well, now I can be, in courage. And then I can move into neutrality. And you start to take these steps up the scale to get to where you're going to. What often happens is people can make a leap and then they have to come back down again. But if you are going to acceptance, you're going to fall back down one or two rungs and you'll end up at being neutral. Anis and I will oftentimes ask, well, are you neutral on the subject? We just do this organically. We were having a discussion about a project that I'm working on, and I had a scarcity emotion come up in me as we were talking about, well, the investment and the timing and what's happening, and we just don't know. And it was around one thing, and she stopped and she's like, whoa, like, where's your emotion on that? And I couldn't articulate it in the time. She said to me, it's fear. You actually used the word, well, where I fear this. And I didn't even realize that was what I was speaking into at that moment. That's not just isolated in one little area. That fear becomes my overall frequency. So everything, my physiological state, meaning my body begins to vibrate at the level of fear. Fear is very close to anger. Fear is close to despair. Fear is close to grief. Fear is close to guilt. Fear is close to shame. And so now I've shifted on one little topic in one little area. I've now recreated a new reality, and my lens is in fear. And so we spoke about it until I was able to get to a point of complete neutrality. And that's where it's like, well, if you lost everything in that venture, would you still be okay? Well, yeah, I guess I would. If it was incredibly successful, would you be any different? No. Like, and you just start to walk through the process step by step until eventually you get to a point where you're like, I actually don't have any emotion on that. Now you're ready from a neutral state to start to move yourself up the scale and to go from being neutral to all of a sudden hitting joy and fulfillment and freedom and all these incredible emotions that come with high level frequencies. Well, that's so much easier because it's almost as if you're now on a dive board and you get to catapult yourself forward into these emotions. For somebody that is in a state right now who is needing to shift from a heightened emotional state to be able to find a point of just being neutral, what would your advice be?
Well, my advice would be what I do. So let me tell you what I do. I believe that there is one cheat code to getting out of the lower frequency, what David Hawkins would classify as the destructive energies. That's very like what they say, like 3D, it's heavy energy. That's where life is hard. Okay. Like just to simplify, lower energies, it feels hard. There's just drama. There's pain. There's struggle. There's those people that live there all the time. And if you need to get out of that, as you said, what is virtually impossible is to go from feeling anger to feeling unconditional love or go from guilt to feeling complete peace. But there is one way to kind of, as you said, springboard up, and that's gratitude. Because any single human on the planet at any given moment can shift their focus to find one thing that they're grateful for. Doesn't have to be related to what they're upset about or what they're feeling fear or shame or grief about at all. In fact, I would highly recommend that you completely not focus on that and instead, okay, what do I have to be grateful for right now? Well, the sun is shining. Okay. We get free sunlight, free heat, free light. I have a home or I have my health, or the rain comes exactly when it needs it, and we have oxygen to breathe. I mean, every single person can find something. And gratitude shifts your altitude. It's like when you take off in the plane, you're going down the runway, and then all of a sudden you go from being like in a very short amount of time, you're on the ground, and then all of a sudden you at a very high altitude. And no other point in that flight are you going to have that opportunity to raise as quickly as takeoff. So every single morning, what do we do first, right? What do we make sure we do? We shift our altitude. And the easiest way to do that is gratitude. Because once you're feeling grateful, it's so much more accessible to access peace, to access love, to access those higher, juicy, creative, powerful frequencies. And then to tune to those frequencies. So when you head out in the day, that's the world you're playing in. And so gratitude for me is the cheat code.
There was a research study that I had quoted earlier where they identified that when people were sharing stories, and in that moment of sharing a story, they touched an emotion that was real. And they identified that that real emotion through the story was vulnerability. So in these tests, it would be somebody would be sharing in a Faraday cage where they're literally blocking anybody else's influence of affecting somebody else's emotional state. They would then ask them questions and they would create fear in them. And then they would ask questions that would create joy. And when they told them to tell stories, that's when it shot up 40 times above enlightenment because they would say, "Oh, my grandmother used to make the most incredible cookies." And they would have these momentary spikes of authenticity. I share this with you because I think that the greatest thing that a person can do to set themselves up for success in managing their frequency is to do it within their relationship. And the
Mhm.
majority of us are in a committed relationship. And if you're not, then go to a friend. And if it's not a friend, go to a family member, go to your mom, your dad, etc., a sibling, and get them to hold you accountable. But what has been my greatest shift for me specifically was having an accountability partner that was invested in what is my frequency. I have shared a story countless times in different formats of me coming home from work, having been in a really difficult, very toxic business environment. And I walked in the front door ready to tell my wife all the things that had gone wrong in my day so that she could validate that I should stay feeling that way, resentment, anger, etc. And she just put her hand on my chest and she said, "Not today. In fact, never again. Don't ever walk into this house again with that emotion. What I need you to do is I need you to leave that somewhere outside. Like, do what you have to do, but you're not allowed in this house until you release that." And at first, I was like, well, screw you, because I was all caught up in my emotions. And when I went back into the garage and I got into the car ready to go for a drive because I was so angry, and I realized my wife's right. And I didn't get out of the driveway, I didn't drive anywhere, I sat there. And I just took some really deep breaths until I could find myself being a little more neutral. And I wasn't neutral by any measure of the imagination, but I thought I was. And then I came into the house and I said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I won't come and offload on you every day." And we ate dinner and she shared how my energy was affecting her energy. We're literally talking about frequencies now. My frequency resonance was interacting with hers and it was negatively impacting her. She wouldn't sleep. She would have insomnia. She would be stressed. She'd be nervous. She'd be anxious. I'd go to work. She would feel better again. And then I'd get ready to come home and it would start to build on my own because she knew what was going to walk through the door because I'd been doing it for 4 years. And so when she stopped me, it was the greatest blessing. And how many of us have an accountability partner in our home that can help curate how we need to show up in that moment? Because if you can curate this at home, the outside world is easy
Mhm.
because you're going to be at home more. You've got the hours when you're asleep, you've got the mornings when you're preparing your mind and your body for who you need to be, you've got the evening, you've got weekends. And so when you create that level of stability and structure at home, at work becomes your practice ground. And I would just say that is the greatest gift that you ever gave me.
Well, thank you for that. I always laugh because, we work really, really hard to keep our physical bodies healthy, meaning, oh, when there's a flu going around, I don't want to catch the flu. I mean, people will go, we don't do flu shots, but I know a lot of people who do, and that's great. They'll go get their flu shot or they'll take all the vitamins and the supplements to keep my immune system high so that I don't catch whatever's going around. And I always laugh to myself because I think, man, if we could just really like dial in how to more proficiently protect ourselves from the energetic flu, right? From the energetic contagion, because your energy is contagious. Being out of coherence with yourself, which is essentially when you are out of alignment, when you are out of coherence, you are feeling these low level emotions. It's also what we would term dysregulation. Being dysregulated in your nervous system is oftentimes caused by experiencing and entertaining and holding and then cycling these low level emotions. And it's contagious. And so wherever you go, you cannot help but express that. You can't help but energetically vomit over everyone that you come in contact with, even if you don't say a word. And so then you're impacting those people, but then you're ultimately impacting the world. And then through feedback loop, that's exactly what you're going to experience back. And so then you're going to feel it again. And so it creates this vicious cycle. And I think your home needs to be your sanctuary, your energetic recharge station, your sanctuary, your place that you guard as if your life depended on it. And Rudy and I, we are very careful about who comes into our home. We are very careful with how we steward the energy of our home, and we're constantly cleansing it, we're cleaning it, we don't have a lot of clutter, we practice feng shui. I mean, we do everything. We play solfeggio, frequency music, we have crystals around. I mean, we do everything that we can to really keep such a space to, as Rudy said, that we have our best shot of holding and maintaining a high level frequency because that's the reality we want to play in before we head into the outside world. We also protect our energy. And so that's another conversation. But I love what you said.
I love that every time we have company and people spend any amount of time in our home, and it most often happens when people sleep over. And then they'll be like, "Your house just feels like a spa. I
They
feel
do.
so recharged, so rejuvenated." And it's because we intentionally create and curate the frequency of our home.
Mhm.
And I want to use this as the closing for today's episode that I go inside of companies every day. And so often, a dysregulated leader is actually causing the dysregulation of the company. Because as Aniston had mentioned, your frequency is contagious. You put one negative person in a room of 1,000 people, and you will drop the vibrational frequency of that room. However, you can bring one positive person into a room of 1,000, and they carry the potential, doesn't always happen, but they carry the potential to completely elevate the entire room and shift them back into a different state.
It's like the tuning forks.
It is exactly like the tuning forks. And, I get paid and brought into businesses to literally be that one person to come in and shine a light and show the way. And so we create these micro steps and moments. But what I want to do today is really emphasize that your relationship is its own entity. And we talk about this a lot, meaning when people get married, or if you're in a relationship, it doesn't have to be through marriage, but if you're in a committed long term relationship and you're committed to your highest and greatest potential, you want to achieve your most, you want to release the shame, you want to release the guilt, you don't want to be neutral, you want to get to joy and love and fulfillment and freedom and eventually into enlightenment and, yes, authenticity. I can be the most authentic with my wife. So if that frequency is 40 times, oh my God, are you kidding me? I'm going to be authentic as much as I can. And that bleeds out into every other area of my life. And so when I say to you, if you are in a long term relationship, then you need to start looking at ways that you can learn to have and create and curate an environment that is setting you up for maximum success. There's two things that I want to leave for you today. And I had not intended on leaving either of these two, but I want to mention these two because I think they're going to serve you. The first is I have my most popular meditation is called the Mood Elevator Meditation. Now, I've been creating meditations for about 14 years now. And Anniston came to me one morning after her meditation. She said to me, "Oh my God, I had this idea. You have to create this meditation. It's called the Mood Elevator. And people get into an elevator, and every single floor looks the same, except there's a different emotion on every floor. Rudi, I think if you guided people, and as much as I love that I created this meditation, it was literally created through Anniston. And it is the most incredible experience because you can get into your body, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and through a very, very specific process, I walk you through how to shift from emotion of guilt or shame. And this is absolutely free. I'm not selling this to you. I'm going to drop the link into the show notes and you can download this meditation. And every morning, you will have a guided 20-minute process for you to move up the scale of emotion. And I don't know why I didn't think of that before. I should have started the episode with that, but this is an incredible free gift for you.
I have to say, it's my favorite meditation. You have some really great walking meditations too, but this is by far my favorite because it works. It like really works. And I have several women that are in my community and some of my coaching programs right now that religiously do it every day. They're like, I'll never not do it because they notice such a difference when they don't. And it's teaching you a skill. And through repetition, I guarantee you, they could probably sit down and in their mind go through the process themselves in 5 minutes. But that's what happens is you listen to it over and over again. You get so good at shifting your own frequency that you'll never again forget that you can. So
Beautiful. I love because it is such an easy process. We do it all the time. And now that I've honed the skill, which has been over a very long period of time, I can do it in a matter of moments. And that's the point. If you can every morning start your day the right way, know what it feels like to be you in an elevated state, well, now you have the roadmap to get back. And there's the secret formula. The second thing that I want to leave for you is a link in the show notes. And this is if you're in a place where you are ready to invest in yourself, you're ready to invest in your relationship, because I alluded to there's three entities, frequencies, literally three frequency vibrations inside of every partnership. I want to say husband and wife or two partners, is that you're going to have your energy, which has a frequency resonance. And that means you vibrate at a very specific frequency the majority of the time, and you'll have that number. Somebody else is going to have their frequency resonance, your partner. And then the two of you come together in a relationship, and that creates a third frequency resonance. And the three frequencies ultimately sets up who you are going to be. And so I'm going to drop a link into the show notes and invite you, if you are in partnership and you're looking to find tools, you're looking for ways to deepen your relationship, you want to be committed to being the very best that you can be and committed to learning how you can support your partner to be the best that they can be. We're launching the Relationship Upgrade. And this is a partnership that we're doing with Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Brooke Hemingway, Anniston, and myself, two power couples who have literally been able to independently create tremendous impact out and in the world, financial benefit, and structural stability. And in addition to that, we have incredible relationships. We have unbelievable sex lives. We just show up in every day full, whole, and healed, not looking for our partner to create that for ourselves. And for the first time ever, we're teaching it. And so I would love to invite you to have a look.
I also just want to say that Rudi and I and Brooke and Dr. Thomas are 4 individuals who are very well aware that we have a purpose and a role outside of being husband, wife, mommy, daddy, that we have an important role to play in the world. And a lot of the couples that have come forward are similar in that nature. And we tend to attract those that know that they have this inner calling, but sometimes they can fear taking steps forward because they don't want to outgrow their marriage. They don't want to outgrow their partnership. They don't know what this would look like if they were to really pursue their heart's calling. And we want to support couples to be able to understand not only how to do that, but that both individuals get to move forward together, that you get to grow together, that you get to expand together, and that in doing so, you will be more impactful. Your work is actually amplifying each other. I am more successful because of my relationship with Rudi, and Rudi is more successful because of his relationship with me. We understand the energetics of that, we understand the dynamic of that, and that is what we're going to be teaching. So we would be so honored if you are feeling the call, if you're feeling the nudge, that this be the year that you and your partner get to take quantum leaps forward, but together.
We are so grateful that you have stuck with us until the end of this episode today. We hope that you are walking away contemplative, really thinking about where do you spend the most of your time and what is that frequency? You can easily just Google what is the emotion scale and it's going to pull it up for you. And, I would say for the next few days, stay in that contemplative state where you really start to sit and say, how am I feeling now? And then write down the emotion. Carry on with your day. Let your timer go off. Ask again, how am I feeling now? And then think about your relationship. How do you feel about that? Your bank account. How do you feel about that? Remember, 95% of what we think and feel is unconscious and we're not aware of it. So unless you're asking the question, you won't actually get the answer. But I'm going to give you a cheat code right now to know whether you are in a high vibe or a low vibe frequency without having to do the inner work. Just look at your life. Look at the area around you, and it is going to tell you whether you are in flow. Are things always happening for you? Is life always easy? Is opportunity just unfolding? Or do you come up against resistance, struggles, hurdles? You lost, dragging, relationships not great, you're not being seen, valued, appreciated. Any of these are going to be very clear indicators of where you are on the scale. And I'm also going to end this episode by saying you can shift this in an instant. Because the moment you create a shift, you're literally in a new reality, in a new timeline. And I liken this so often with my kids, like you're on a railway track and you can manually shift a lever that moves you from this track to another track. And the moment you're on another track going in the same direction, you're going to a different destination. And that is how quickly you can move up the emotion scale. I wish for you is that you today have a different level of awareness, but you do an action and apply it, whether that's downloading a free meditation or whether you go online and you research the different scales and start to manually create that shift. We know that there is tremendous, tremendous availability of all the abundances to you, but you have to actually be the conscious one to make that choice. We love you so much. Thank you for listening to the episode, and we'll catch you on the next one next week. If this episode gave you clarity, peace, or a perspective shift, hold on to that. And here is how you lock it in. Subscribe so that you keep building momentum week after week. And if you're the kind of person that believes a good message should travel, please leave a review. Reviews aren't just ratings. They're signals that help this reach the people who are ready for it. And then share this episode with somebody you love, someone you lead, or somebody that you were rooting for. Links are in the show notes so that you can connect with me online and on Instagram. Now go out there and take one beautiful, bold, and aligned step and make it count. I'm going to catch you on the next episode of the InPowered Life Podcast.